Kyrie to Chronicles of Ancient Greece, the podcast that delves deep into the fascinating history, myths, and legacies of the ancient Greek world. This is episode 11. Is this Sparta? Well, yes, this actually is Sparta. I've mentioned the polis in passing, but so far we haven't actually had a closer look. And since the end of this season will feature the beginning of one of the most impactful wars for all of humanity, the Persian Wars, I thought it might be a good time to introduce one of the most legendary Greek polis of them all. But before we kick the Persian messenger down the bottomless hole, so to speak, there are two small housekeeping items I want to mention. First, the podcast is now also available in video format on YouTube. Before you think you will see me blabbering about though, I have to tell you that I'm basically just releasing the audio with the script in video format. And second, I am looking to bringing you a Chronicles of Ancient Greece discussion forum, but I honestly have no idea how to do it and what it would cost. Right now, I am thinking about a service like Squarespace, but I am still in the very early stages of planning, and if any of you have any experiences, by all means, get in touch with me. Okay, we have waited long enough now. Let's throw a quick but meaningful look to our queen, who gives us an ever so slight nod to signal the go-ahead to commit a very unnecessary but undeniably cool-looking murder, and off we go. When we think of Sparta, we think, of course, of the famous defiance of the 300 at Thermopylae, who were, by the way, definitely more than 300 in total, but we'll get to that in a later episode. There are a ton of myths surrounding Sparta, like, for example, the absurd notion that they went into battle almost naked, which I don't know if you've ever fought in a phalanx, but yeah, you definitely needed armor. And then there is the myth that the Spartans, more obsessed with minimalism than an Instagram interior designer from Denmark, never bathed or groomed. Never. Their whole lives. It goes without saying that this is ridiculous, because had it been true, the smell of the 300 alone would have sufficed to make the million Persians flee in horror. But since we're talking about myths right now, let's have a look at the mythical origins of Sparta. In that origin tale, the Dioscuri, the twins Castor and Pollux, who were part of Jason's Argonauts and who accompanied Heracles on his way to the Amazons, play a guiding role. After the descendants of Heracles, led by Eurysthenes and Procles, swept into Laconia, legend says the divine twins appeared to them in a dream, directing the conquerors to the fertile Eurotas Valley. By revealing hidden springs and safe river crossings, Castor and Pollux ensured the new settlers could establish themselves securely. In gratitude, the Dorians built them shrines and integrated the twins into their civic origin. Not merely patrons in later cult, but active co-founders whose celestial sanction legitimized the very first Spartan kings. Castor and Pollux also loomed large in later Spartan life. Sons of Zeus and the nymph Taygete, these inseparable twins embodied martial camaraderie. If one died, the other shared his immortality. Local lore also cast Heracles as the purifier of Laconia. Pausanias recounts altars to Heracles Alexikakos, the averter of evil, perched on Mount Taygetos, marking the hero's ritual cleansing of the soil and his purge of brigands. Though no Bronze Age inscriptions confirm these exploits, the proliferation of Heraclean shrines suggests that Spartans, like many Greeks, embraced his myth as an ancestral charter. Beyond the Heraclean and Dioscuri cults, Spartan religion was woven into every aspect of public life. Major annual festivals, such as the Carneia in honor of Apollo Carneus, and the Hyacinthia for Apollo and the hero Hyacinthus, structured the civic calendar, suspending military campaigns and mandating communal feasting, athletic contests, and choral performances. Sacred precincts at Amyclae for Apollo, at Therapne for Helen and Menelaus, served as focal points for pilgrimages and state rituals. Priests drawn from the citizen body performed sacrifices, while the kings themselves retained exclusive rights to certain rites, reinforcing the inseparability of religion and governance in Sparta's austere polis. After the mythical founding, centuries passed before Lycurgus emerged from the mists of memory. Plutarch, writing 6 centuries after the fact, casts Lycurgus as a selfless lawgiver who consulted the oracle at Delphi and returned with laws carved on oaken tablets, which he of course refused to display until his death. This tale of oracles and moral grandeur provided later Spartans with a palpable hero, even as no archaic stele or plaque betrays his historic footprint. Beneath all those stories, though, lies a subtler chronicle, told by pottery shards and hill fort walls. At Ios Ioannis, just beyond modern Sparta, Mycenaean stirrup jaws and kyklakes, adorned with spirals and marine motifs, link Laconia to the palaces of Pylos, Mycenae, and Tiryns. Trade of olive oil, wine, and fine bronze turned the Eurotas plain into an active center of Mycenaean commerce. Yet, unlike Pylos' grand Megaron, Sparta's prehistoric remains are modest. Simple dwellings on level terraces, small tholos, tombs, and no royal palace. When the Bronze Age collapsed around 1100 BC, written records vanished and the archaeological trail thinned. Proto-geometric pottery appears sporadically. Occasional hill forts at Kofono and Agios Andreas hint at localized strife. Only in the late Dark Age do we see a clear upsurge. Distinctive Laconian pottery, richer grave goods in some tombs, and the first communal dining refuse pits, echoes of the later state-run messes. The material silence on Lycurgus, though, forces us to conclude that Sparta's defining institutions, land division, common meals, dual kingship, did not spring fully formed from one man's mind. Shocking. Instead, they evolved over the 8th and 7th century BC, shaped by hallowed revolts, economic shifts, and the urgent need for unity. Myth supplied the sacred framework. Archaeology reveals a gradual transformation from village to warrior state. At the core of Sparta lay the great Retra. Whether heard in Delphi or devised in Laconia, it was a skeletal constitution balancing 2 kings, the Aegeat and the Eurypontid, a council of 30 elders and a citizen assembly. Each king claimed descent from Heracles, but still wielded limited power. They led armies in war and performed sacred rites in peace, yet were subject to Gerusian oversight. If both kings were absent, the Gerusia appointed a regent, safeguarding against rash commands. The Gerusia itself, 28 men over 60 elected for life, plus the 2 kings, crafted legislation and judged grave crimes behind closed doors. Across from them stood the Apella, the citizen body that met on the slopes of Mount Taygetus. Debate was banned. The elders proposed motions. The Apella answered only by acclamation, loud cheers, or stern silence. No speeches, no filibusters, just Spartan brevity in action. Aristotle later celebrated this blend of monarchy, oligarchy, and limited democracy as a mixed constitution of what he called elegant stability. Economic life was equally engineered for equality. Conquered lands of Laconia and Messenia were carved into equal plots, kleroi, attached to hallowed laborers who tilled them. Each Spartiate received enough land to supply his mandatory contributions to the Syssitia, the communal mess halls where adult citizens dined as equal. To prevent luxury's corrosive influence, gold and silver were absolutely banned and replaced by bulky iron spits and bars. Charming. This enforced austerity welded the citizen body together, yet it bore a harsh edge. Failure to supply your share of the food to the Syssition cost you your seat, and with it, well, your citizenship. Economic equality among the few was secured by the perpetual threat of expulsion for any who faltered. And if you didn't know, yes, the Spartans were a fun bunch to be around, especially when it came to raising their children. Because from age 7 onwards, Spartan boys learned the price of the system in the agoge. Waving goodbye to home, they entered a state soup kitchen of hardship. Sleeping on reeds, wearing a single cloak against winter's chill, subsiding on meager rations. Better still, they learned stealth by hunting helots at night under paidonomoi supervision. They were state-appointed tutors who enforced every rule with the lash of a cane. Once again, so fun. Boys trained in H-bands, agelai, forming bonds of steel that would last a lifetime. At 20, those who had endured the regime joined one of the roughly 15 Syssitia, surviving the final test of adult citizenship in communal feasts where loyalty to Sparta was renewed with every bowl and every oath. Full citizen rights followed: the vote, the shield bearing in war, and a place in the assembly of peers. Spartan society as a whole rested on 3 rigid tiers. At the bottom lay the helots, state-owned serfs or slaves, who, outnumbering Spartans by as many as 5 to 1, toiled in the fields. Above them stood the periokoi, the dwellers around, free but non-citizens inhabitants who managed trade, crafts, and maritime affairs. They furnished hoplites in wartime and paid tribute in peace, but never shared Spartan political rights. At the very top stood the Spartiates, the warrior elites. Perhaps 8,000 strong at Sparta's zenith, they alone wore crimson cloaks, voted in the Apella, and marched into battle. Yet their privilege came tethered to performance. A Spartiate was only as secure as his ability to contribute to the Syssition, to maintain his kleros, and to live up to the austere policies of the state. Across every sphere of life, Spartan ethics prized silence, self-control, and collective honor. He who speaks little, errs little, is a famous Spartan proverb. In public, men spoke few words. In private, every statement carried weight. Marriage was reduced to a semi-public ritual. Couples met in darkness, births were inspected by elders, unfit infants were left to perish. Even the Germans are like, come on guys, lighten up a little bit at least. Interestingly enough though, women in Sparta enjoyed a status unmatched elsewhere in Greece. Free to own and inherit property, estimates actually suggest Spartan women controlled up to 40% of the land. They received physical training alongside boys, fostering strength believed essential for bearing robust offspring. Their economic power underpinned Spartan society. With men often away on campaign or in camp, women managed the kleroi and household affairs, ensuring the polis's smooth functioning. Their relative autonomy also extended to speech. famous for bold retorts, as when Gorgo, wife of Leonidas, quipped that only a Spartan woman gives birth to a real man, they embodied the martial virtues the state prized. This unbroken discipline made Sparta unique in the ancient world, a living experiment in societal control, an austere machine of law and ritual, and a mirror of the tensions between individual freedom and collective security. The same holds true for Sparta's army. Spartan warfare was defined by the hoplite phalanx, a tightly packed formation of heavily armed infantry whose overlapping shields and advancing spear points moved as one discipled organism. From the Agoge's crucible emerged soldiers who prized cohesion over individual heroics. Victory depended not on solitary valor, but on every man holding his ground, shoulder to shoulder. Campaign seasons were ritualized. War was only conducted during certain months to honor the Canea festival, and Spartan kings led the army in a single decisive push rather than prolonged sieges or attritional warfare. While they reluctantly built a fleet under Lysander, Spartans remained quintessential land fighters, striking swiftly, maintaining unyielding discipline in camp and battle, and relying on superior training and morale to break enemy will rather than elaborate tactics or guile. Beyond arms, Sparta cast itself as a philosophical counterweight to Athens. In Plato's Republic, communal meals and guardian training, strapped of helots and iron ingots, became pillars of an ideal state. Aristotle, in his Politics, praised Sparta's balanced constitution but excoriated its cruelty towards helots and its cultural sterility, warning that a city sacrificing education and the arts for war produced half men. Hellenistic Stoics and Cynics lauded Spartan austerity as a virtue, even as they glossed over its brutality. Rome, too, fell under Sparta's spell. Cato the Elder invoked Spartanitas, Spartan simplicity, when railing against Roman luxury, as he was known to do, while noble youths endured brief Agoge-style camps of barefoot drills and communal tents before returning to toga parties. Cicero and Livy delighted in contrasting Athens' endless debate with Sparta's terse action, using Sparta both as a laudatory model and a cautionary tale. During the Renaissance, the 1542 Aldine edition of Plutarch's Lives reintroduced Lycurgus and his laws to humanists like Machiavelli and Montaigne, igniting debates on republics and monarchies. Enlightenment figures such as Rousseau pondered Sparta's paradox, justice and equality at the expense of freedom, and eyed Lycurgus's regime as a blueprint for civic virtue. In Victorian Britain, so-called muscular Christianity borrowed Spartan drills, cold water swims, bare-knuckle boxing, daily exercise to forge moral fiber in public schoolboys. And in the 20th century, totalitarians perverted the Spartan model. Mussolini resurrected phalanx imagery in fascist rallies, and Nazi youth manuals echoed Spartan discipline's darker lessons. At its core, though, Sparta embodies an enduring paradox: radical equality for a select few resting on the oppression of the many. Modern theorists, from Marx to Hannah Arendt, cite Sparta as the ultimate case study in trading freedom for security. In our modern era, Sparta has been both lionized and caricatured in film, literature, and video games. From Frank Miller's graphic novel 300 and its cinematic adaptation, where stylized "This is Sparta" battle cries echo worldwide, to documentaries that reassess the Helot tragedy popular culture oscillates between celebrating Spartan heroism and critiquing its brutal social order. Video games and historical novels continue to draw on Spartan imagery, ensuring that the red-cloaked warrior ethos remains a potent, if often simplified, symbol of discipline and defiance. Which actually already brings us to the end of this week's episode. We'll have a lot of cause to deal with the Spartans much more down the line, and we'll obviously explore culture, army, philosophy, and legacy in much greater detail when we get to the Persian and Peloponnesian Wars. But for today, that's it. A simple, no-nonsense look at one of the most no-nonsensical polys in all of history. Somewhere, somehow, I like to imagine Leonidas smiling and nodding slightly at the thought, before he once again kicks someone down a hole. Seriously, man, don't you have hobbies?